Okay, good morning, everyone. We're here with the Horseshoe Crab Management Board. We've got some important items to discuss on our agenda today. I'll set a few ground rules for us. We'll go through our agenda as is typical with the ASMFC process. During our board meetings, we allow for public comment on items not on the agenda, which I will be taking up soon. If I do see a considerable show of hands, we will allow a certain amount of timed public comment. If you have public comment on an agenda item, as many people are aware, there is an item up for possible action regarding our revised ARM model. Then I will allow public comment on that agenda item later in the meeting, assuming we have a motion for a possible action. So keep that in mind, please, if you raise your hand for public comment on where it would be most appropriate. Another agenda item or some ground rules I would like to cover is we're going to have a presentation from Dr. Jan regarding the revisions to the ARM model. And we're going to follow that with a presentation by the peer review, which is going to be presented by Dr. Yong Chang of Stony Brook. And I want to have both of those presentations go in order, and then we will turn it over to questions from the board. And just to staff and to Dr. Suika and Chen, as that goes forward and you get questions, to make things a little easier, instead of having me as an intermediate, when the questions are directed to you, please just feel free to answer as they come in when we get there. So with that, I'll move on to the two board consent items that we have on the agenda. The first is approval of the agenda. I hope I kind of laid that out for us. If there's any concerns or additions that someone feels are needed to the agenda, anyone on the board, raise your hand now, please.
I have no hands, Joe.
Thanks, Tony. So we'll consider the agenda approved by consent. Also, we have in the package approval of the proceedings for the October 2021 meeting, which you all should have had a chance to look at. Is there any concerns or edits that you feel are needed to the proceedings from the October meeting?
I have no hands, Joe.
Very good. Thanks again, Fanny. Okay, so as I mentioned, this is a time where we'll allow public comment on any items not on the agenda. So if there are members of the public and you're able to raise your hand, please do so.
I don't have any hands, Joe.
Okay. Well, with that, we do have two important presentations, as I have mentioned. Caitlin, I don't know if you want to give an intro before we get started. And then, as I said, I would like to go through both presentations before we take questions.
Sure. So John Suika will be presenting the revised ARM, and then following John's presentation, Yong Chang will be providing the peer review report. I think they'll give a pretty good background, so I will just let them go for that, if that's all right.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Okay, this is John. Let me show my screen. And just make sure. Are you seeing the presenter view or the slideshow?
We've got to swap it.
How about now?
Yep, there you go.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Caitlin, for the introduction. This has been a work in progress for the past couple of years, a lot of effort by a lot of different people on the ARM subcommittee. So first, a little management history and assessment history. In 1998, the Fisheries Management Plan for horseshoe crabs was approved. In 2007, an effort began to develop a multi-species management approach for horseshoe crabs and red knots. And then in 2009, the original version of the Adaptive Resource Management, or ARM framework, was peer reviewed. By 2012, Addendum 7 was approved by the board, and the ARM was instituted for management of horseshoe crab harvest among the Delaware Bay states. By 2013, we did another coastwide stock assessment update, and then in 2019, we had another coastwide benchmark stock assessment, and that was when we began this revision of the ARM framework. So within the original ARM framework, the problem statement, which guides our work, was to manage harvest of horseshoe crabs in the Delaware Bay to maximize harvest, but also maintain ecosystem integrity and provide adequate stopover habitat for migrating shorebirds. Within the original ARM framework, there were 3 possible red knot population dynamics models with differing model weights based on expert opinion and our belief in each one of these 3 models. There was a no effect of horseshoe crab model, horseshoe crabs affect red knot fecundity, and then horseshoe crabs affect red knot survival and fecundity. On the horseshoe crab side of things, we had a model that was based largely on literature values. It started off as an age-structured model that we published years ago, that was then converted to a stage-structured model. Originally, we had a possible selection of 5 harvest packages of optimal harvest, depending on the abundance of horseshoe crabs and red knots. And these packages ranged from a complete moratorium for package 1 to a 420,000 male and 210,000 female harvest under package 5. Since the ARM has been implemented, each year we've always selected package number 3, which was 500,000 males and 0 females. So why should we revise the ARM at this time? Well, basically, it's time to. This is an effort to address critiques from the original peer review. We have a decade more of data for both species. The previously used software known as adaptive stochastic dynamic programming is now obsolete. And this reflects an evolution of our modeling techniques and expertise in adaptive management. And also, the management board requested to include biomedical data in our ARM management. Something that was largely ignored in the original ARM framework. Also, we have a problem with the previous knife edge utility functions in that they tend to act as an all or nothing harvest control rule. So, we've known this is a problem for years, and this was our opportunity to, take a look at that and remedy some of the problems that occur because of those utility functions. So our revised problem statement, basically had the first part, which is exactly what the original problem statement was, but we added this text in red. That was, and to ensure that the abundance of horseshoe crabs is not limiting the red knot stopover population or slowing recovery. And this was in efforts to acknowledge the fact that, the red knots are now listed under the Endangered Species Act as threatened, and to highlight the close link between the species. So just a quick overview of all of the changes, and I'll go into much more detail on these throughout the rest of the presentation. We revised the horseshoe crab and red knot population dynamics models. We revised the reward function. As I mentioned, ASDP software is now obsolete, so we abandoned that in lieu of a new approach called approximate dynamic programming for the optimization. And this ADP approach can actually be run in readily available software such as R. Also, harvest recommendations would now be on a continuous scale. And one of the major advantages of the ARM revision is that it will lead to easier model updating with the collection of routine data that we collect each year. One thing to note is that the conceptual model of horseshoe crab abundance having an influence on red knot survival and reproduction remains intact, with the underlying intent to ensuring that it's not limiting population growth of red knots. So one of the terms of references that we had were to re-examine our definition of Delaware Bay origin crabs. We still define Delaware Bay origin crabs as crabs that spawn at least once in Delaware Bay. Genetics data indicate that crabs everywhere from Cape Cod to Cape Hatteras are related, and tagging data indicates that there is movement of crabs along the coast. Recent genetic evidence from Dr. Eric Hollerman at Virginia Tech was used to estimate the proportion of states' landings, discards, and biomedical harvests that were of Delaware Bay origin. So given this new information, we updated the values from our previous assessments such that 100% of Delaware crabs, 100% of New Jersey crabs are Delaware Bay origin. For Maryland, it's 45%, and for Virginia, it's now 20%. So moving on, just a conceptual diagram of how the revised ARM framework works. So as you know, we have a horseshoe crab component and a red knot component. Within the horseshoe crab component, our information and data from trawl surveys and harvest gets input into what's known as our catch multiple survey analysis. The results from this catch survey analysis are then also used in the red knot assessment model, which is known as an integrated population model. Along with estimates of crab abundance, we account for spawning survey information, in particular the proportion of crabs that spawn during May, Arctic snow cover during the breeding of red knots, mark recapture resite data, and then aerial counts and ground counts. So the catch multiple survey analysis and the integrated population model are then used to create forward projecting simulation models of both species. These forward projecting models are then brought together in the approximate dynamic programming part of the model. And this is where the optimization for optimal harvest packages or harvest recommendations is made. So first, I'll go into detail on the catch survey analysis. This was approved during the 2019 benchmark stock assessment for use as the best estimate of horseshoe crab abundance in the Delaware Bay area. And we've shown this equation before. Essentially, our number of multiparous crabs is a function of the number of multiparous plus primiparous crabs the previous year, decremented by mortality and catch. The catch in this case includes everything from bait, biomedical, and dead discard estimates. The biomedical and dead discard estimates are a huge step forward over the previous ARM framework. Also, we have natural mortality, which is estimated at 0.3. This was based off new analysis of tagging data. And we also found that there were no differences in natural mortality between the sexes. Some of the other inputs, obviously catch, the Delaware Bay origin bait landings. This is just a graph showing trends through time in those. So these are landings that come from Delaware, Virginia, or Delaware, New Jersey, Virginia, and Maryland, and takes into account that proportion of Virginia and Maryland's crabs that are of Delaware Bay origin. And you can see in more recent years the very low landings of female horseshoe crabs because of the ARM management that has been implemented for years. Biomedical mortality. We have six facilities coastwide and 4 within Delaware Bay. For the development of the ARM revision and the results that I'm presenting today, we use the coastwide estimates in this report rather than Delaware Bay specific. And this is to avoid data confidentiality issues. If this new framework is approved for management, Delaware Bay specific biomedical mortality would be used when actually setting harvest recommendations on an annual basis. Our dead discards came from the Northeast Fishery Observer Program data, and we revised our methods from our 2019 benchmark stock assessment to have what we think are better estimates of gear-specific mortality. And these are just graphs of the total discards and then the proportion that actually die after being discarded for males and female horseshoe crabs. Our fishery independent surveys that go into the model include the New Jersey Ocean Trawl Survey, which samples waters along the coast of New Jersey. And there are the population trends in terms of mean catch per tow that we see during the spring of this survey. We also have the Delaware Adult Finfish Trawl Survey, which samples fixed stations throughout Delaware Bay, and here are the corresponding trends in the data that we see from that survey for males and females. And then we also have the big one, that we really rely upon, and that's the Virginia Tech Trawl Survey. And the area shown in the map here of the Delaware boxes out the Delaware Bay area, that's the area that we use in this assessment. And here are the trends in estimates coming from the Virginia Tech Trawl Survey in terms of partitioning the crabs out into newly mature females, which are primiparous, mature females, which are multiparous animals, and then the same for males. So when we put all of these data into our CMSA model, here are a quick view of the results that we get. Through time, we can see a general increase in the number of multiparous animals. The primiparous animals fluctuate quite a bit, and those really crazy looking years between 2013 and 2016, those were the years in which the Virginia Tech Trawl Survey lost its funding, and we didn't have data from Virginia Tech during those years. Our terminal year for this assessment in 2019, we estimated that there were 9.3 million females within the Delaware Bay area. And here are the same results for males. Again, the years between 2013 and 2016, when the trawl survey went away, we have some pretty highly variable estimates of abundance for the primiparous animals. But again, also the multiparous animals have increased over the past several years. The terminal estimate was 21.8 or 21.9 million total males in 2019. We also conducted several sensitivity analyses of the CMSA model. These included varying discard mortality rates, natural mortality, survey weights of the three fishery independent trawl surveys that go into the model, and looking at coastwide biomedical mortality, either included or excluded. And all of these sensitivity analyses showed that the CMSA output in terms of total population size was very robust. Female deviations from the base model range from minus to plus 7%, and deviations for males range from minus 12 to plus 4%. So moving on to the red knot integrated population model, or IPM. This model is used to estimate annual apparent survival of red knots, recruitment rates, and the influence of horseshoe crabs upon both of those. So there are three components to the IPM: a marker site model, which is an open, robust design model that estimates the survival probability and site use while accounting for imperfect detection. The data used here was from 2005 to 2018. A count model, or a state space model, which estimates change in population size among years of the aerial count data. And then a life cycle model, which describes the underlying population dynamics that link survival and recruitment to a change in population size. So this is just a schematic of what the integrated population model looks like, and you can see the boxes around each one of these component models and where they share information. So for example, the marker site model shares information with the count model in terms of the proportion of birds that are present in Delaware Bay each year. And the life cycle model shares information with the count model in terms of the change in population size from one year to the next. Moving on to the results from the IPM, here we have a graph depicting the apparent survival probability over years from 2005 through 2017, and you can see it's fluctuated, anywhere from greater than 95% to just somewhat between 85 and 90%. The recruitment of red knots, and recruitment is in terms of a per capita recruitment rate. So how many new birds do we get 2 years from now for every bird that we have this year? And recruitment is rather low throughout all of the time series. The black dots represent the mean, and the blue dots represent the median. So within the IPM, as I mentioned, we can examine the effects of covariates on these life history parameters of red knots. So we included in the model the effect of the proportion of horseshoe crab spawning that occurs in May and what effect it would have on survival, an interaction term between crab abundance and the proportion that spawn in May, just the horseshoe crab abundance alone, Arctic snow cover, how that may affect survival, and then finally how horseshoe crab abundance affects annual recruitment. And of these covariates that were examined, It was only the horseshoe crab effect on survival showed a significant effect. You can see the dots on this graph represent point estimates of the regression coefficient, and the lines or the whiskers represent the error about that. And it was just the abundance of horseshoe crabs and its effect on survival is the only parameter that did not overlap 0. So it is a significant effect of horseshoe crabs on survival. And this just shows a graph of how survival and recruitment are a function of horseshoe crab abundance. The top graph shows survival, and you can see over the range of horseshoe crab estimates that we have, there is a slight increasing trend in red knot survival, but overall, the change in survival over the range of horseshoe crab estimates that we have is only, our expected survival only varies by about 2%. The overall mean annual survival of red knots was 0.93, and the overall mean recruitment for red knots was 0.063, and no effect of crab abundance on recruitment. So moving on, we take these estimation models and then turn them into projection models. For horseshoe crabs, it's based on the catch multiple survey analysis, but we also have to generate recruits in that model to turn it into a projection model. So we use the mean recruitment of 1.7 million premiparis females and 2.2 million premiparis males, and these were based on the entire time series of our estimates of premiparis animals coming from the CMSA. Recruitment does decrease when total females are less than 3.75 million. We chose that number because that seemed to be about the lowest total females that we've estimated throughout the time series with the CMSA. The red knot projection model was based on the IPM, and we used MC output to link all those parameters in the IPM in the forward projecting model. So the models were then linked and simulated together for the optimization in order to find harvest policy functions within the approximate dynamic programming. And I'll go into more detail about what a harvest policy function is. So if we look at a reward function, this is what we want to maximize in our optimization. So the annual reward is a function of the utility of horseshoe crabs, the utility of red knots, and their product. So we sum them and then also add in the multiplication of the two. So if we think of an ideal situation, this is when harvest would be near the maximum allowed, and red knot abundance would be above a threshold that we've maintained from the previous arm of 81,900 birds. So if that's the case, then everybody's happy. You can harvest a lot of crabs, and you have a high abundance of red knots. So values of those utilities can range from 0 to 1. So they're scaled so that red knots and horseshoe crabs are on an equal playing field. And ultimately, the total reward that you can get within a given year would range from 0 to 3. And as an example, if we're able to harvest a lot of horseshoe crabs, red knot abundance are still high, plus their product, we get a reward score of 3. The advantage of this formulation of a reward function is that it prevents getting all of the reward from horseshoe crab harvest alone, and it accounts for. We include red knot abundance in this because red knots do have inherent value to us as well. What the optimization does is tries to move us from a situation where we have low utility on both species to high utility on both species. So it's trying to push us from that upper left corner down to that lower right corner. So from 0 to 3. And we want to maximize the average total reward over some long time horizon, for example, 100 years. So getting into, specifically now what is inside of those utility functions. So here for red knots, the utility on red knot is a value-based decision. And what we've come up with is, it's very similar to what was in the previous arm, is that there's no utility to red knots unless they get up to that threshold value of 81,900. So in the revised arm, red knots start to have utility once you're at 90% of that threshold value. And then once you hit that threshold value, utility of red knots is equal to 1. For horseshoe crab utility, it's a little more straightforward, and it really boils down to an economics decision. And that is the proportion of maximum economic value or maximum harvest. We've long considered that the value of a female horseshoe crab is twice that of a male horseshoe crab. So what we can do is in any given year, the 2 times the number of harvested female crabs plus the number of harvested male crabs divided by the twice the maximum allowable harvest of females and the maximum allowable harvest of males. That gets your utility. So the question is, okay, how many crabs can you harvest to determine that horseshoe crab utility? Well, that is a function of what are termed the harvest policy functions. And we have 3 harvest policy functions, which are based on the abundance of female horseshoe crabs, the abundance of male crabs, and the abundance of red knots. And these functions are each defined by separate logistic functions. That's the equation up at the top. And within each one of these logistic functions, you have an alpha parameter and a beta parameter. The alpha parameter or the beta parameter signifies the inflection point of these curves, and the alpha parameter signifies the slope at the inflection point. And the alpha and beta parameters for each one of these curves is really what is optimized in the ARM framework, or in the revised ARM framework. So what comes out of these are a harvest factor ranging from 0 to 1, which then you multiply by the maximum allowable harvest for each sex of horseshoe crabs to get how many crabs you can harvest in a particular year. For males, this is very straightforward. We just multiply the harvest factor by 500,000, and that's our number. For females, we take into account both the harvest policy function for female horseshoe crabs as well as the harvest policy function for red knots. So we sum them and then subtract their product and multiply that by the maximum maximum allowable female harvest. So the way the optimization proceeds is that we in a simulation environment is that we randomly select an alpha and beta parameter for each harvest policy function. And then in that simulation, we apply the recommended harvest specified by that suite of alpha and beta parameters for a given level of horseshoe crab and red knot abundance. The reward is calculated for that year, and then the population is projected forward for an iteration. We then repeat this process over and over based on that same suite of alpha and beta parameters. At the end of the simulation run, say 100 years, we then sum the yearly rewards over that time horizon. And we have an algorithm in there that searches for the alpha and beta parameters from each of those 3 harvest policy functions that maximizes the average total reward over 10,000 simulations. So it's fairly computer intensive, but it still runs faster than what the previous ARM model did when it's optimizing. So the results and the output from the optimization, here we have the harvest policy function for male horseshoe crabs. We see this curve that increases and then levels off at 500,000 as a function of male horseshoe crab abundance. The blue area indicates the areas where we currently are and where we expect to be over the next 100 years. So relatively high abundance, which also corresponds then to a relatively high allowable harvest of male horseshoe crabs, near 100,000. For females, the picture is a little more complicated because you have to look along 2 different axes. So the x-axis represents adult red knot abundance in thousands, and the y-axis represents adult female horseshoe crab abundance in millions. So we have these curves, we have these curves across a range of male or a range of female crab abundance and red knot abundance. So what you can do is, for example, you look at these curves. If we had 50,000 red knots out there and 10 million female horseshoe crabs, where they intersect on this graph, and that band of color kind of tells you how many female horseshoe crabs can be harvested. So with 50,000 red knots and 10 million horseshoe crabs would be approximately, or just under 150,000 for an allowable harvest of female horseshoe crabs. The green dots on this graph represent the projected populations of both species over the next 10 years. So you can see this is the range in which we might fall. Okay, so this next series of graphs shows the predicted population sizes of red knots and male and female horseshoe crabs if the ARM were implemented and moving forward with our optimal harvest policy functions. We can see that red knots, on average, the black line in this graph represents the median projected population size. They should increase gently and in asymptote at around 100,000 birds. The dark gray area represents the 25th and 75th percentiles, and the light gray area represents the 2.75% and 97.5% percentiles. For horseshoe crabs, we see that the females would likely asymptote at 7.3 million and the males at 14.9 million. Now, you might look at this and think we would expect we're going to expect a decrease, but keep in mind there is a lot of uncertainty in these population projections, but based on the wide confidence intervals, and we would predict that currently we're probably at the upper end of the projected distributions here. So there is a chance that horseshoe crab abundance could decline. Not just because of ARM recommended harvest. So another question one might naturally ask is, okay, well, what effect does this actually have? What effect does the ARM implementation have on our projections of red knot abundance? So this graph shows an overlay of two scenarios. One in green, where we implement ARM recommendations. So we have bait harvest plus our background harvest that we have no control over. That's the biomedical mortality and also the dead discards. And the blue area is background harvest only, so no bait harvest allowed. And we see for red knots that the projected distributions overlap nearly 100%. In fact, there's only about a 1% chance that under ARM management we would result in fewer red knots than under no bait harvest at all. ARM management actually has a slightly bigger effect on horseshoe crab abundances, and you can see where the equilibrium levels of males and female horseshoe crabs are slightly less if we implement ARM management. So as an example of harvest recommendations, if we look at the years 2017, 2018, and 2019, the top part of this table shows recommended harvest under the old ARM framework. And we see that there's the abundances of male and female crabs and red knots during those time periods. And the previous ARM obviously recommended 0 female harvest and 500,000 male only harvest. If the revised ARM were implemented and we had the same data from 2017 to 2019, we would now recommend roughly 150,000 female harvest across those years and still 500,000 male harvest across those years. So moving on, one of the sections of the report is stock status and conclusions. For the Delaware Bay population, there are no overfished or overfishing definitions as in a traditional stock assessment. And our problem here is more of an optimal harvest given the states of horseshoe crabs and red knots. And this is dependent upon the underlying population dynamics of both species, as I've shown. One thing we want to point out is that the major source of uncertainty in both species is recruitment. You change the values of recruitment, and that has the greatest effect on population projections and recommended harvest. But the uncertainty on this should resolve as we collect more routine data. Some of the advantages of the ARM revision is that models for both species are based on empirical data from Delaware Bay, and it also incorporates additional horseshoe crab mortality sources. The previous ARM model was based largely on literature values and was more theoretical in approach. Model updating will be easily conducted with our routine monitoring data, and we could even update everything in these models on a yearly basis. There are no capacity limitations for ASDP, I should say ADP. We don't have the same capacity limitations in ADP as we did in ASDP, and all uncertainty gets carried throughout the optimization. In ASDP, our former software, we were limited on the amount of stochasticity on life history parameters we could include. The reward function also now values both horseshoe crab harvest and red nut abundance, and you can't get full reward from one of those two only. Another nice thing is that we can make harvest recommendations on a continuous scale. These could be truncated to maintain yearly consistency in management. So, for example, we might, if the recommended harvest from the ARM revision was 130,000 females, you could round that down to 100,000 males, and that should allow some stability and avoid rapidly changing quotas from one year to the next. For research recommendations, I'm not going to go through every single one that are outlined in the report. The complete list is in the supplemental report, which represents both research recommendations developed by the ARM subcommittee and additional ones that were recommended by the peer review panel. We have them grouped based on future research, such as implications of climate change, observed egg density versus horseshoe crab abundance, something to further examine. Also data collection. There's some more analyses that we could do with the Virginia Tech Trawl Survey. Look into sex and stage information from Delaware and New Jersey trawls. I know both of them plan to start sexing and staging all crabs. And additional tagging efforts for both species, crabs and birds. Other research recommendations pertain to data analysis and modeling, such as additional tagging analysis, regular model updating, and use of evaluation of perfect information in making management decisions. Now, in all assessments, we always strive to reach consensus among committee members, but unfortunately, in some cases, we can't reach consensus. So we did have 2 minority opinions filed as part of our report, one by Larry Niles with New Jersey and one by Wendy Walsh with the Fish and Wildlife Service. So just to briefly touch on those minority opinions, the key issues from Larry Niles were an apparent lack of trend in egg density data, an apparent lack of trend in the Virginia Tech Trawl Survey, and inclusion of New Jersey and Delaware trawls in the catch multiple survey analysis. So we have in the report, we had detailed responses to their minority opinions, but just to summarize, for the first one from Larry Niles, we removed from consideration, we removed egg density data from consideration early on in the ARM process, even back in the original ARM. We have a direct link between horseshoe crab abundance and estimates of red knot survival that we can use. And also want to say that, direct comparison to the early egg density estimates from Botten et al. In 1994 is inappropriate because of differences in spatial and temporal sampling designs between now, what New Jersey does now, compared to what Botten did, back in the early 90s. The lack of trend in Virginia Tech trawls. We do see an increasing trend in the swept area population estimates that are used as input into the catch multiple survey analysis. Also, including New Jersey and Delaware trawls in our assessment, they have both been long used as an index of abundance for horseshoe crabs, and they were included in 2004, 2009, 13, and 2019 stock assessments or updates. Also, it's very common to include multiple fishery independent surveys in a given stock assessment model for any species. Moving on to the Walsh minority opinion, she focused her opinion on the utility functions, stakeholder input, the survey weights going into the CMSA, and model uncertainty. As far as utility functions, the previous utility functions were technically flawed, as I discussed, and resulted in an all or nothing harvest. So the problem with those, the main problem with those was if we would happen to hit that 11.2 million female horseshoe crab threshold, we would automatically bounce to the maximum allowable harvest under the old ARM. We've known that was problematic for a long time, and in recent years we have gotten close, just based on Virginia Tech swept area estimates. As far as stakeholder input, we do have a diversity of expertise on the ARM subcommittee, Delaware Bay TC, and the advisory panel. And also there will be a comment period on any draft addendum process that may stem from this ARM revision. So there's more opportunity for other stakeholders to weigh in. As far as the KIT survey survey weights, we were never clear on what the appropriate weighting should be. This was a question that we had during the 2019 benchmark stock assessment. That peer review panel then recommended that we have equal weighting. So that's what we went with in this ARM revision. And we also reached consensus early on in the ARM revision process to go with equal weighting. This was also ultimately supported by the peer review panel this time around. As far as model uncertainty, yes, they are. Our models are uncertain. You saw the population projections of each species, and there's a lot of uncertainty on those. But this is exactly why we do adaptive management modeling. So I'll stop there, and I guess we'll hold the questions until Dr. Chen has given his report from the peer review panel.
Great, thank you, John. Yeah, I hope that we can go forward in that manner. I think that might be helpful, especially if that presentation helps answer some of the questions that might be coming up. I always appreciate your background summaries. We went through the peer for horseshoe crab, and a lot of we've come a long way, and a lot of work has gone into this, and so I appreciate that presentation, and happy to turn it over for the peer review report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I have a slide? Yeah, so my name is Yong Chang. I'm a professor at Stony Brook University, and I'm chair of this peer review panel. Next slide, please. So this is we have a scientific review workshop that was held from November 16 to 18 last year to review the ARM revision developed by the Horseshoe Crab Technical Committee and Subcommittee, and the ARM Subcommittee. And the scientific review focuses on models, input data quality and quantity, and modeling outputs, uncertainties, and overall quality of a new ARM framework. And the scientific review report, you can find the scientific report online. Next slide, please. So the peer review panel consists of 4 members, including Dr. Eric Knoll from Chang University in Canada, and Dr. Kelly Robinson and Dr. Justin Bob of Michigan State, and myself from Stony Brook. Collectively, the panel has expertise in horseshoe crab and migratory shorebird ecology, population dynamics and statistics, stock assessment, and adaptive resource management and structured decision making. Next slide, please. So the ARM work group developed models, all kind of models to project site-specific horseshoe crab abundance with the inputs from horseshoe crab stock assessment model. The work group also developed an integrated population models for red knot population dynamics and the change in the word function, and shifted to approximate dynamic programming, which removes some constraints associated with previous ARM framework. And I think John gave an excellent talk about the work. Overall, the review panel concludes that the workshop completed their term of reference, and the arm revision is significantly improved over the previous arm framework, and that the arm revision represents best available science and is appropriate for providing management advice. So that's the overall conclusion from the review panel. Next slide, please. So we're given a list of term of references, so I will go one by one. And for the first term of references, the panel concluded that a proposed catch multiple survey analysis model and a new projection model developed for horseshoe crab are appropriate for use in arms. And the panel also agrees that CMSA estimated Delaware Bay horseshoe crab stock dynamics is robust and appropriate for use in arm. The panel recommend that Delaware Bay horseshoe crab stock be better defined. And so there are some new genetic studies, some tagging studies indicated that, there are some, the stock can be better defined. And the 4 time series of recruitment estimate be used in the projection model to account for all uncertainties. Next slide, please. So for the second term of reference, the panel concluded that the proposed integrated population model for red knot is a significant improvement over the previous model, and analysis for the red knot population dynamics are appropriate for use in arm. The panel recommend that the work group continue exploring the multi-state model that was used in previous version of arm, but I have some issues this time. The panel also recommended that the red knot model parameters be updated frequently, particularly in the short term, to reduce uncertainties in the model and a decision for the horseshoe crab harvest. Next slide, please. So for the third term of reference, the panel concluded that data compiled and used are adequate for arm revision to provide a horseshoe crab management recommendation. The panel recommended the research be conducted to evaluate how changes in environment and sampling time may influence horseshoe crab survey catchability. The panel also suggests to evaluate apparent lack of a relationship between horseshoe crab egg densities by beach survey and the red knot survival, and to update the assessment models with the new data when they become available for both species on an annual basis in the near future. Next slide, please. So for research recommendation, and like John mentioned, there's a long list, but I kind of included 4 of them here. We think it's important. The panel made a research recommendation for improving assessment methodology and data collection, and including revisiting ARM framework to evaluate their performance every 5 to 10 years, and continuing funding the Virginia Tech Horseshoe Crab Survey program, evaluating the new utility and harvest function to make sure that broad representations of stakeholders' values, and using expected value of perfect information to evaluate the effects of uncertainties in red knot and horseshoe crab dynamics on harvest decision. Next slide, please. The panel also reviewed 2 minority report and majority responses in the report. And the panel agreed with the majority responses in survey effectiveness. And the panel also agreed with the majority responses in reformulating utility and harvest functions for fast updates to reduce uncertainty. Panel recommend that the mismatch between egg sampling and horseshoe crab spawning abundance be evaluated. And the panel also recommend considering uncertainties in horseshoe crab management and ensuring the current function to adequately represent the stakeholder concerns. I think that's the last slide. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. and I'll be happy to answer the question.
Great, thank you. And hopefully, as we go through with the questions, if individuals want a slide pulled up, that staff will be able to do that for us. So with that, Tony, if you could help me out, I'd like to see hands from the board on questions regarding either presentation.
Yep, will do. I have no hands raised right now, Joe.
Well, you guys are good.
Okay, now, Joe, I have 3 hands: John Maniscalco, David Borden, Connor McManus, and Rob LaFrance.
Okay, we might need you to go one more time, Tony, but as I mentioned, Dr. Chen Suika, or if a question ends up going to staff, please don't wait for me to relay. You're allowing you to speak. As if a question is addressed to you, please feel free to answer. We'll start with John Maniscalco. Go ahead, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question is for Dr. Suika. First, thank you both for the presentation. You made a reference to some recent genetics work by Dr. Hallerman. And there was a comment, I believe, in maybe one of the minority opinion reports that 44% of New York spade harvest was of Delaware Bay origins, and referencing personal communication from Eric Hallerman. The last tagging table I saw associated with the assessment said that there was less than 2% tag returns from New York and Delaware Bay, or vice versa. And I'm just wondering what the basis for that 44% comment was, and if we have any more information about this, the genetics analysis that Dr. Hallerman is undertaking. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Hallerman's analysis was, samples were taken from landed horseshoe crabs, and certainly a lot of them in the New York area originated from Delaware Bay or could be traced back to Delaware Bay. But through our tagging information, as you mentioned, what we see is, although a large portion of, or a relatively large portion of New York's harvest might be of Delaware crab, or might be from crabs that originated in Delaware Bay, from the tagging information, we don't see a large net movement to New York and then back to Delaware Bay. So if you think of, in terms of metapopulation dynamics, what we have here, or what it kind of looks like, is that Delaware Bay is a source population and New York would be a sink population. So you have a net movement of crabs from Delaware Bay up to New York. So those crabs in Delaware Bay that move to New York are unlikely to ever move back to Delaware Bay. So essentially those represent, almost the same as, just a natural loss of crabs from Delaware Bay as they move out. It represents near permanent emigration for those crabs. So I don't know that we would want to make a leap that, and certainly it merits further analysis, that harvest in New York would be impacting the crabs that would eventually spawn in Delaware Bay.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I may add it, and the review panel did recommend it and further study to better define the Delaware Bay horseshoe crab stock structure.
Thank you, everyone. And too many Johns. John Suika, if I may follow up, I think it had been a while before this type of genetic composition was used to update the proportional harvest. So I'm curious, is there a standing research recommendation, or is there guidance on how often that should be updated, and maybe even as Dr. Chen suggested, looking into that, like the number and timing of samples that were used for the current work, an exploration of that.
Well, we certainly have research recommendations to continue looking into that. As far as specific timing, how frequently that should occur, Joe, we haven't, got into that level of detail on that research recommendation.
Okay, thank you. And my apologies to David Borden and the others who are already in the queue there for jumping in with my own question, but I believe David Borden is next.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two quick questions. I was just wondering whether or not there's any evidence that the center of abundance on horseshoe crabs has shifted along the coast. There are a number of other species where we've documented that. So if I could get an answer to that. And then the other question is there any evidence that natural mortality rates have changed over time? So those two questions. Thank you.
Okay, to your first question about the center of abundance, we haven't looked specifically at that, but I would say that it doesn't appear that there has been. If we look at the New Jersey ocean trawl survey and the distribution of their catches, we see that throughout the time period that we have, or throughout the time series that we have available to us, the majority of their catches occur close to the mouth of the Delaware Bay, and the farther away you move, the lower their catches are. So that seems fairly consistent. So I guess that would lend some support that the center of biomass of horseshoe crabs hasn't shifted. To the second question, could you repeat that again, please?
Second question was whether or not there's any evidence that natural mortality rates have changed over time.
Right now, we don't have any evidence of that, but our tagging, the available tagging data doesn't go back in time, really all that long. To come up with our current estimates of natural mortality, we focused on those years of data, since the state of New Jersey put their moratorium in place, feeling that was most representative of recent years and would also eliminate the most potential for confounding impacts of any bait harvest going on out there. So at this point in time, I don't think we have a strong indication of any trend in natural mortality, or at least the data that we have available isn't amenable to actually looking at that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I just want to mention that during the review, actually the panel requested a plot of positive tolls in the survey for horseshoe crab, and we didn't see any tempo trend on that. So that probably an indication that the distribution has not been changed. I just want to add it. Thank you.
No, thank you for the addition. Tony, please correct me if I'm wrong. I had Connor McManus and then Rob LaFrance next.
That's correct. And just to let you know, Roy Miller put himself in the queue as well.
All right. Very good. Connor, go ahead, please. Connor, are you there?
I just want to say commend the group on a nice job with the assessment. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now. Yep, go ahead.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I just want to first commend the technical group here for all the work that they've done. It's a symbol of a lot of new advancements that I think have helped improve. To be appreciative of that. Two questions for me. The first is for so regarding the weighting for the surveys, and maybe for John, if you could remind me what the impact of the weightings were on our inference for crab abundance by sex. Just the magnitude, higher or lower, and maybe just thinking about could you speak to other tools that were evaluated to understand the weighting or infer weighting, or incorporate catchability of the surveys to the weighting, just a little bit more for the context of the minority report.
Sure. In the 2019 benchmark stock assessment, we applied a weighting system that was based on a hierarchical model that took all three of these surveys, and it was the inverse of their standard deviation within that model. So how much variance was explained by each of those surveys in that combined hierarchical index. So we used that originally as a weighting system, which it gave the Virginia Tech Trawl survey the highest weight and less weight to Delaware and New Jersey trawls. During the peer review in 2019, the peer review panel had a question about, if we use that weight, which is based on a variance, and then we also had the CVs of each individual survey in the CMSA model, are we double counting, basically double counting the variance of each surveys? So there was a lot of discussion about that during the 2019 benchmark stock assessment, and we came around consensus between the stock assessment subcommittee and the peer review panel that it's probably most appropriate not to weight either one or have any weighting for each individual survey. So we carried that through to this new ARM revision, and we reached consensus among the subcommittee early on that we shouldn't weight one versus the other. In the end, in the minority opinion, there was a desire to then put weights back in. So we actually tested the sensitivity of model results to that. We used the original weights from the 2019 benchmark stock assessment, which would be completely inappropriate to put back in now. We also did a sensitivity analysis on the, one suggestion by the current peer review panel was perhaps weighting based upon the amount of area sampled by each survey. So we did that. The area weighting method almost put Virginia Tech survey and the New Jersey Ocean Trawl survey on equal footing because, although the distributions of their sampling area don't overlap completely, in terms of area, they were about the same. And in the end, it really doesn't make that much difference. As I said in the summary of the results of the sensitivity analyses for female horseshoe crabs, over everything that we did, we might range our final terminal year abundance estimates of female crabs might vary plus or minus 7% at most. So also, there is I can certainly understand the desire to more heavily weight the Virginia Tech Trawl survey because that survey was specifically designed to capture horseshoe crabs. So the gear is designed to more effectively sample horseshoe crabs. And you can see that in the raw data. The average catch per toe from Virginia Tech survey is greater than that of the other two surveys. So if a crab is encountered, Virginia Tech is more likely to catch it. Now, having said that, all of the surveys suffer from the same problem in terms of interannual variation. So we get these, in all of them, we can get these extreme up and downs, from one year to the next. And, basically it boils down to being in the right place at the right time to catch crabs. So all the surveys suffer from that. Some years you catch quite a few, you hit the hot spots. Some years you don't. So in terms of, reflecting the population, all of our surveys, our underlying assumption is that whatever your catch per toe is, your index of abundance, whatever that is proportional to the total population size. So at this point in time, and the results of the surveys are correlated with one another. Especially since approximately 2010, we've seen an increase in abundance in all of the surveys. And the current peer review panel agreed. We had a lot of discussion about weighting systems, and eventually the current peer review panel made the suggestion and recommended in their report that as long as we still have this correlation, the equal weighting that we ultimately used is appropriate at this time.
Thanks, John. I really appreciate that. Very, very thorough and helpful. I guess my other question is, you cite that some of the greatest uncertainty perhaps in the results is tied to recruitment. So I guess I was just curious if, similar to some of the red knot kind of modeled covariate work you were doing, have you looked at other indicators to from the environment or from outside of maybe regular population dynamic models that could help inform recruitment in your model? Do you see trends in some of the other things that would be driving recruitment external to red knots that may be used to inform the model?
Yes, you know, a while ago we did use the Virginia Tech Trawl Survey data and applied a general linear model to account for covariates, thinking that perhaps you know, fluctuations in catches might be due to environmental effects, and maybe those differ between primiparis and multiparis crabs. So we attempted that. The results of it didn't really change much. But yeah, I think there is more that we could do, and some of the research recommendations from this peer review panel in terms of the spatial distribution and habitat suitability modeling for horseshoe crabs could come into play in the future. For red knots, we have those covariates that we evaluated in the IPM. You know, the effect of crabs on red knot recruitment, also you know, Arctic snow cover and so on. We still retain those in the model. You know, we didn't just completely drop those. I mean, right now they're non-informative because there is no effect of them, but they are still retained in the model. If, as we collect more data into the future, we start to see that those effects, you know, become evident. You know, it could just be still a matter of data limitation that we can't discern those effects right now. But they are contained within the model, and as we collect more routine data and update our models, if those start to show some sort of effect on red knot recruitment, we should be able to tell that.
Great, thanks.
Great questions, Connor. Thank you for that. And I especially appreciate you almost got someone named Dr. John to say right place but the wrong time. Let's see. I think next is Rob LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation today. My question was very similar to what was just asked about the trawls and the weighting. In the minority report, there was a weighting suggested. I just want to know whether that model was run. I think Wendy Walsh recommended 0.59%, 0.16, and then 0.25. Did you guys actually run that as the scenario? And then I have a follow-up question on something different.
Yes, that was exactly one of the scenarios that we ran in the sensitivity analyses, and there's a table in the report and in the supplemental report of the results of that. And that weighting scheme came from the original weighting that was sent to the peer review panel for the benchmark stock assessment in 2019, which ultimately, you know, they suggested we don't weight using those.
So that's in the supplemental report. Thank you. And my larger sort of bigger question is this issue of the egg masses. It seems to me that for a number of reasons, they're not really being included in the overall analysis and modeling. And I'm just wondering if you could take a little time and explain what some of the problems with that is, what some of the problems with that approach are. And I think I see recommendations that you'd like to do more with that going forward. So I'm just trying to get a little better understanding of that. Thank you so much.
Okay, the egg density data, you know, they're highly variable and subject to not only the abundance of spawning horseshoe crabs, but also the spatial and temporal variation that we see in the effects of wind and wave action on the beaches, and also the timing of spawning, the timing of peak spawning as to when egg surveys are conducted. So a lot of things can influence your measure of egg abundance. The use of egg density data as a predictor of red knot survival was abandoned even in the original ARM framework, just because of the high variability of egg density data. And we also found a direct link between female crab abundance and red knot survival. And that relationship still exists in this ARM revision. You know, another point is that our management of horseshoe crabs directly affects crab numbers, not egg densities, which are subject to a host of all those other factors. You know, we also, oftentimes you see the comparison to those early numbers by Mark Botten, back in the early 90s. But there's difference between how egg density data is collected now versus the sampling design that was implemented in Botten's study in the 1990s. So a direct comparison between the two is probably not appropriate. And as you said, we do make recommendations that, it would be, eggs certainly are the direct input to to the red knots. That's what they're actually using. So we do have research recommendations to continue to look at the egg density data, see if we can come up with any sort of predictive models between crab abundance, spawning beach surveys, and those egg density and red knots. Now, if you think about that, that makes that's a lot of steps and a lot more sources of uncertainty. So perhaps we could do that into the future as we gather more data and examine that closer. But right now, the most efficient way to see what's the impact of horseshoe crabs upon red knots is that direct jump from crab abundance to red knot survival, which we do see a significant relationship with.
Thank you for that. I just would add maybe taking a closer look at standardizing how you actually analyze egg masses might be helpful as well, just because I think if there was a standard approach as to how to do it, you might be able to get rid of some uncertainty. Just a thought. Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate that. That's kind of put us on this journey is making sure that there were more eggs available on the beaches. So it's an important question and something we need to continue to look at. Roy Miller, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. LaFrance's question answered the very thing that I was going to ask about as well. So thank you.
No, thank you.
Oh, sorry, Joe.
Go ahead, Joe.
You have Mike Millard, Shanna Madsen, and I think Connor's hand is left over from before, but I'm just double checking.
That's correct. Thanks, Tony.
Okay, go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick question for John. John, about halfway through your presentation, you put up an analysis, that regression analysis that suggested red knot survival was significantly related to horseshoe crab abundance. And then later, you showed those projections of the red knot population with horseshoe crab harvest and without horseshoe crab harvest, and they were essentially 100% concurrent. I can see where those two conclusions, a lot of people in the public and some of us around the table might find those two conclusions inconsistent. Can you unpack that a little bit and tell us how that can be?
Sure, Mike. In the strictest sense, if you have a decrease in horseshoe crab abundance, you would have a decrease in red knot survival. But at the same time, there is a lot of variation about that relationship. And over the course of over the range of female horseshoe crabs that we have observed or estimated by the CMSA, the effect on survival is rather weak. It's statistically significant, but there's not a big effect. Going from 4 million to 12 million crabs, it causes a 2% difference in annual survival, with quite a bit of uncertainty about that. So when you have the uncertainty about the red knot, the relationship between crabs and red knot survival, you also have uncertainty and variation in natural mortality of horseshoe crabs. You have uncertainty in the recruitment of both horseshoe crabs and red knots. Taking all of that together, the amount of uncertainty due to other factors really dwarfs the relationship between crabs and birds in terms of survival. So that within the simulations that go into the ARM optimization, the expected distribution of red knot population growth under the ARM is really indistinguishable from the distribution under a no bait harvest scenario. I don't know. Hopefully that answers the question. at least puts it in perspective more.
Yes, that helps. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Well, thank you both. We have Shannon Madsen next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Dr. Speaker, for this presentation. It was really informative, and thank the whole assessment team for doing all the work on this. I think Mike asked a similar question to one that I was going to ask. I was asking about the second graph that he was referencing, which I think was on a predicted population size slide. And on that slide, it showed the predicted population for red knots and both male and female horseshoe crabs. And then the differences when you allowed bait harvest as well as the biomedical harvest. And I guess I was questioning, what is that bait harvest? What is the value for that bait harvest that you were using in those graphs? Is that the maximum allowed harvest by the model?
That would be the harvest that's recommended at any point in time based on the harvest policy functions. So if during the course of one of those simulations, the crab population or bird population declined, harvest at that point in time would also decline. So what those represent is the implementation of those harvest policies, not a specific harvest number. So it's actually simulating the really it's simulating the management system in how harvest changes on an annual basis depending upon the abundance of crabs, birds, and both sexes of crabs. But overall, yes, the absolute maximum you could harvest at any given point in time would still be 110 or 210,000 females and 500,000 males. We haven't changed that maximum allowable harvest from the previous ARM framework.
Thanks, John. That clears that up. Thank you.
That is the cue, Joe.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that was a great discussion. With two very well thought out presentations to start us off with, and then a round of very important questions, I think. So we do have an agenda item for considering management response. I'll turn it over to Caitlin. I know she has some slides for that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess I will make one note before I put up the slides for management response. So typical to our normal consideration of stock assessments, I think procedurally for this, we would want the board to consider accepting the ARM revision for management use, and then subsequent to that, consider a management response. So I just wanted to make that note before I put these slides up here for you. And Maya, could you make me the presenter really quick? Thank you. Okay. All right, so this is going to be very quick. I just wanted to give the board a couple of things to guide the discussion here. So for the management response for this ARM revision, some first thing to note is that the current ARM framework that we use for the Delaware Bay management was implemented through an addendum 7 to the FMP in 2012. So therefore, in order to revise the framework and make the improvements that were recommended by the ARM subcommittee in the peer review, we would need to approve a new addendum. So if that is the desire of the board can consider initiating an addendum today to consider implementing changes to the ARM framework as recommended by the ARM subcommittee and peer review. And then as John presented and we discussed earlier, these are the main changes that were made to the ARM framework in the revision and what should be included in the addendum. So that's the definition of the double loop process, the definition of harvest packages, the lambda values, which are the percent of each state's harvest that comes from the Delaware Bay stock, state allocations of the total Delaware Bay harvest, and then adaptive management recommendations for allowing future changes to the ARM framework to occur outside the addendum process. And then, as always, if desired, the board could consider other issues through the addendum as well. So I just wanted to quickly give that as a context for considering a management action. That's all I have. But like I said, I think the first step would be to accept the ARM revision for management use.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Kevin. I think that now is the appropriate time to do that, but I do want to speak to it for a few moments. I think all the board members are well aware of the ASMFC process that we're dealing with here. As I said, we had two great presentations on all the hard work that was done to improve this model, and a peer review that accepted those terms of reference and this model for being appropriate for management use. There's been a considerable amount of media. We had one or two written comments that made it in time for our materials, but since then we've had a few others that expressed in particular concern that we would be taking action today to allow harvest of female crabs in the Delaware Bay. I think it's important to note that that's not the decision before the board today, but whether or not this model represents the best available science and if it's the most appropriate for use. It's a significant enough change to our management process that it's going to require another addendum to the FMP. And that, of course, will kick off an entirely separate chance for the public to comment on this model for management use. What Caitlin's laying out before us is, as we start this addenda, are there other items that we want to add which could be important? And I would say that with so much that we're deciding on today, it may be difficult to fully flesh out that decision. So for just a second, I'll take off my board chair hat and put on my vice chair hat for the commission and say there were discussions during our executive committee this morning. The ASMFC staff are going to be very taxed with a great number of possible addenda and amendments that are moving forward for management plans. It will require a tremendous amount of public hearings, or could, between now and May. So I would say that although I would like to have a vote on whether or not to accept this model, to fully flesh out and kick off the board's needs for this addendum, may not need to happen today. We might be able to, suggest that, or a motion that, starts that process, but the board may have time to gather their thoughts and have another discussion at a future meeting on all the things we would like to see a plan development team include into this. And that is something I haven't talked a great deal about with staff, but I think is something that we should consider as we have this discussion and entertain a motion. So let's open this up for discussion. Thoughts on where we are, interest in moving forward with accepting the peer review and a potential potentially starting a new addendum.
I have John Clark.
Okay, John, let's start it off.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Joe, we've just had a presentation on the phenomenal work of science here done by the ARM panel, the peer review. It's clearly the best available science, and I fully agree we need to accept this for management use. But as you said, the actual management part, what we would actually put in the addendum is a lot of thought has to go into that too. So I am in full agreement with you that today is the time for us to approve this for management use. But as far as the addendum, give it some more time to think of all the alternatives we want in that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, John. Tony, other hands? Thank you, John. Tony, other hands?
I have Pat Gear.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
One sec. There we go. John Clark got his mic off. Thanks.
Okay, is that better? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with what you said and what Mr. Clark said. I think we need to approve this ARM division today. I think they did a great job on it, and it's the best available science. But I agree with you. I think we need, given what we heard this morning in the executive committee, as many as 40 public hearings over the next few months. I think it's, we should take our time and basically, come back together in May and have a discussion on what we want this addendum to look like. So I agree with what's been said so far.
Great, thanks, Pat.
You have Rob LaFrance and then Emerson Hasbrook.
Go ahead, Rob.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I just have a question on what by accepting this for management purposes, that just means we accept that the work has been done and we're going to consider it moving forward, but nothing of substance would happen with it until such time as we passed another addenda. I just want to make certain that my understanding, is that the correct understanding?
Yeah, so this is one that I think I'll start, but I would appreciate staff helping me out, especially if I misspeak on where I start. So we would be accepting that this is the best model available to produce estimates, of what we're trying to get at here. So the ARM model, is something that's been in place for several years now. We're looking at that utility function. We're trying to achieve a harvest package that allows or suggests the safest harvest levels for horseshoe crab that don't inhibit red knot survival. So we need something there. We have a peer review that suggests that this model is the best available to spit out a harvest package. As this moves forward, that will continue to get a range of options for the harvest packages. And that is something that will go into the addendum for us to look at. Tony or Caitlin, anything I missed or that could be covered better?
I think you did.
Oh.
Sorry, Caitlin.
All right. I was going to say, you did a good job, Joe. And I think the main takeaway to the question is that, yes, we would have to approve an addendum in order to implement the ARM revisions.
So Tony, just to follow up then, so basically what we're saying is if we accept this today, we're saying that this, because of the work that's done and because of the peer review, we accept it as the best available science on this particular issue. However, in terms of moving forward on management, for example, whether the board thinks that the numbers are correct and whether we want to get in a greater detailed understanding of the risk associated with the different packages, that still has to work through an addendum process. Is that right?
Rob, I wouldn't couch it as we think the numbers are correct, because I think by accepting the assessment for management use, you are saying it's the best available science. So in that sense that you are agreeing with the information that's in the ARM review. How you utilize that for management then is a decision that you all are going to need to make through the management process. So I would interpret
That's the clarification I was looking for, basically, the difference between accepting, much not unlike what happened in Manhattan, where we accepted some information and then we had to figure out what our risk analysis, our risk tolerance was going to be before we decided on certain management choices. I see this following that same process. Is that fair to say?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, it's a good point. These are the only two species that we've attempted to tackle at a multi-species modeling level. And, there were recommendations from the peer review on the tours regarding stakeholder values. And so, moving forward, we have to remember that's not only part of the management decision, it's actually part of the modeling. So it's important to consider that this isn't just a model said that it's safe to harvest some female crabs and therefore you have to harvest female crabs. So it's an important distinction that, you know, it's a more complicated process than that for sure.
Joe, just to fill in then, just to get you your cue back, you have next Emerson Hasbrook, then Dan McKiernan, followed by Pat Gear, and then Chris Wright.
Thanks, Tony. Yep, go ahead, Emerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, based on your response to the previous couple of questions, are you ready for a motion then to approve the ARM revision for management use at this time? If not, you can come back to me if you want to have some more discussion.
Thanks, Emerson. Yeah, I mean, we have a few hands in the queue and we're doing pretty good on time. So let me clear the hands that we have, Emerson, and then I'll come back to you. Thank you. So Dan, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Emerson kind of stole my thunder. I was wondering if you'd be ready for a motion. It seems to me that, you know, this was an outstanding piece of work, best available science, and I'm just trying to think forward about timing of new proposed management measures and the seasonality of harvest. So if we were to undertake a new addendum, is it expected that we would accomplish it in time for the 2023 harvest seasons, or would it likely extend it to 2024 for the first time we would see any modifications of management?
Yeah, so, you know, I think at an ambitious timeline, we would have been, you know, revisiting, accepting a new addendum at the October meeting, which is our last meeting of the year, and when we're typically setting harvest specifications. So I think that slowing that down could certainly result in kind of a status quo methods for setting the specifications for 2023. But keep in mind, and again, that's so important of a consideration for all the individuals who are so concerned that a new model means a changing of how we're going to manage the species in the Delaware Bay, that we could have taken an ambitious timeline, have this model in place, but still choose to stay with a status quo harvest package because of all the uncertainties expressed so far, and that we think that's the best choice. So I think there are some other items that, you know, we've talked about. We had a pretty good discussion during the October meeting last year on what should be included in this addendum. So, you know, we might want to take some time and kind of really work on that and see where we end up.
So that sounds like a future Horseshoe Crab board meeting to kind of set the parameters for that, and it would take a few meetings. So I think it sounds like at this point you'd be looking for a motion to accept the revised ARM, and I'd be happy to do that once you clear the queue.
Great, thanks, Dan. And to some extent, you know, we've had some members speaking in favor of that, and I've kind of made it clear that as we've moved forward, even with just information that we heard this morning, that's where I'm kind of leaning as board chair. But I'm certainly willing, and you know, to entertain any motions if folks feel otherwise. But with that, we'll go to Pat here.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Emerson and Dan stole my thunder as far as the motion is concerned. So that's all. I was just going to make a motion to approve this.
Okay, thanks. We have Chris Wright.
Yeah, I'm in support of the ARM, but my question was related to some of the earlier questions in regards to timing and whether or not we were going to try to get an addendum done before 2023, and that timing, and whether or not we were going to assign anything to the PDT. But I guess we'll just move forward the way we're going right now.
Okay, thanks, Chris. And you know, I do want to say once again that I certainly showed my hand, but I'm not trying to strong arm the board here. If there was an interest in moving this forward more quickly, then I think we can certainly have that discussion, whether in the form of a motion or a little less formally. But not everyone was privy to the executive committee. Not, you know, I know not everyone tunes in necessarily, but you know, as far as what staff is dealing with, we have Menhaden and striped bass amendments that have some pretty big issues in them. We're looking at a rec reform initiative, and you know, potentially we're talking about dozens of public hearings between now and May without even tackling horseshoe crabs. So I want to put that out there. Tony, if no one else in the queue, I'm going to go back to Emerson.
We don't have anybody else in the queue.
Okay, thank you. Emerson, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The staff have a motion prepared to accept the ARM revision for management use. So I move to accept the revised ARM framework and peer review for management use.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Dan McKiernan.
Thanks, Dan. Any discussion on the motion?
Don't have any hands raised at this time.
Okay, thanks, Penny. As I mentioned, if any motions had come before the board on possible actions today, I wanted to also give the public a chance to speak. So I will open it up now to the public if they had any questions or things that they wanted to comment on regarding the motion.
Just giving it a second. I currently don't see any hands raised. And if just to make sure everybody who's not familiar, you click on the hand button, the little icon that looks like a hand, to raise your hand. Still no hands.
Okay, Tony. Thank you. I appreciate that. So let's see, Caitlin, with that, is there anything else you need regarding this, or Tony, since we did kind of break this into two elements, do we need a discussion on when we might, you know, pick this up, or is there the possibility of meeting or getting on the agenda for the next commission meeting?
Joe, I think there's definitely the possibility of getting this on the next commission meeting. If it is the intention of the board to initiate an addendum and you want the PDT to start to do some work, I don't see an issue with at least making that motion to initiate and have the PDT perhaps start some progress. You know, obviously with the time allowed that we will have, depending on all the different management documents that we talked about this morning in executive committee. So if that is something that the board does want to do, then after you dispense with this motion here, you could consider a motion to initiate an addendum. Obviously, addendums don't have, you know, they can have a longer time frame for development process. It doesn't have to come back to the board immediately. The PDT could start looking into some things and the board could provide additional feedback at the May meeting.
Right. Okay. And so Thank you for reminding me that there's a motion on the floor. So let's do that then. Let's dispense with that first. Is there any objection to this motion? Please raise your hand.
I see no hands raised in objection.
Okay, great. Thank you. And so again, there was a lot of public interest in this process, and I think some misunderstanding to how we work with this stuff. So when we don't kind of keep a standing plan development team that works on fishery management plans or their amendment or addendum. We kind of need to collect a new group. Typically, we need to collect a new group of individuals from the states every time we start a new amendment or addendum. So a motion here wouldn't necessarily put us back on a fast track, but they would have at least one standing task. They know that they need to go back to what we did for inclusion in the FMP for the original ARM model in 2012 and kind of retool that for a new addendum. And then they will be standing by for any other tasks that come from a future board meeting, hopefully at our very next board meeting. And Caitlin or Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, but the establishment of a PDT will go back. States will nominate members, and through an email process, those members would get approved. Is that correct?
Yes. We can have, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to jump in. Joe, can you just say that the motion carries? Sorry.
No, keep me honest here, Tony. Yeah, so the motion carries. It was passed by consent. Thank you. And right, so Caitlin, I think, confirmed that for us, Tony. And then with that, if any members of the board are interested in allowing a PDT to get formed and start some of this work, I think spreading this out could help alleviate some of staff's task assignments as well. So happy to entertain a motion for that.
We have John Clark.
Go ahead, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'd be glad to make that motion. Is there a already made motion to, oh, there we go. Yeah, I would like to make the motion to initiate an addendum to consider incorporating the revised ARM framework for management of the Delaware Bay stock. Does it have to say into an addendum?
No, since it said.
Yeah, we start.
All right, thanks.
No, thank you. Tony, do we have a hand for a second?
We do. Mike Luisi.
Thank you, Mike. Any discussion on the motion?
We have Rob LaFrance.
Go ahead, Rob.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make certain I understand this. So all we're doing at this juncture is just going around the states and pulling together a PDT, because I know in other PDTs I worked with, they like to have specific questions that they need to answer and come back with some specific report. So as long as the idea here is just to get something started, I'm fine with that. I also would be interested if Caitlin wouldn't mind sharing to all the members of the board her PowerPoint screen there. I think that was very helpful for folks. So anyway, that's where I just want to get clarification on, if I could. Is that all we're doing? Just setting it up?
Well, yeah. I mean, I thought I was clear that that's exactly what I was trying to explain before asking for a motion. We have a motion before the board, and I guess we will have to turn to the maker and seconder of the motion if that's also their intent.
Joe, just quickly.
I agree, Joe.
Go ahead, Tony.
Are you saying that you all don't, once the PDT is formed, do you all not want them to do any work on the addendum between now and May? I think that there was a list of things that Caitlin had provided in her PowerPoint that they could at least start to explore and bring perhaps back some comments back to the board at that time, just to at least, as you said before, spread out the work a little.
Yeah, well, I mean, they certainly have the assignment of adapting or using the changing the wording of where we are for management using the revised ARM framework. I guess, if there are other assignments related to the ARM, then I would think that would be included in this task. I was thinking other elements that were listed by Caitlin. I don't know. If they have time between now and then, I think I don't think it's harmful. I think the biggest concern was are we moving too quickly with a new model? So, I guess again that might be up to the maker and seconder of the motion on are there other tasks included, and if so, then that we may need to revise this motion.
If I could add something, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, please, Kate. Go ahead.
I just want to kind of give everyone my perspective on what this would look like if this motion were to pass. So as discussed, we would form a PDT. I think we have a pretty solid foundation for getting the addendum started, given that the ARM revision is complete. We have recommendations from the ARM committee and peer review for what is the best available science and what should be modified from the old ARM framework. So I think the task that the PDT could work on between now and the next meeting would be identifying what pieces of that might be decision points for the board in the addendum versus items that would just be updated automatically as part of the model, things that are more technical in nature and wouldn't necessarily require a decision by the board. Does that kind of give you a better idea or sense of what we could work on with the PDT?
Yeah, I absolutely. And, again, there were some very important recommendations, in my opinion, in the peer review report as well. So, yeah, I think that's a great way to lay it out, Caitlin. Thank you.
Thanks, Caitlin. Joe, you have Mike Luisi.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I seconded the motion, and then, I was planning to make the comment after I seconded that I liked the language that Caitlin used in her presentation regarding initiating the addendum, and it included language it involved the peer review and other recommendations. It was a little more clear as to painting a picture, not just for us today, but for anybody who is going back to read the actions that this board the actions they took today. I think it would be more clear if that language was incorporated into this motion before we vote on it. That way, that list that was generated in the presentation kind of sets that basis for what the PDT would start to look at, including the peer review recommendations, if that makes sense.
I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it's a good potential addition. But I think Robert's rules better than I, so perhaps you or Tony is that suggested to be like a friendly amendment to this?
Well, yeah, when I raised my hand a second, I was going to make the point, but we jumped in. The conversation never came back. I raised my hand, but then it came back down. So I was going to ask John. So Caitlin, if you can go, there you go. That's the slide I was looking at. John, would you consider using the language below where that Caitlin went through as establishing a little more detail in your motion? And I'd be happy to second that.
Yeah, I'm fine with that, Mike. I assumed, especially given Caitlin's follow-up, that the tasks that she had outlined there would be what the committee would be looking at. But I agree with you to make it more clear what we're planning to do. That would be great. I'm fine with that.
Yeah, so I think that last part of that motion then, as recommended by the ARMS subcommittee, and peer review panel would fit in nicely with the motion that John made. And I'm certainly willing to second that as well.
Great, thank you, Mike. I really appreciate that. That was helpful.
Maya, could you put up the motion again? And I think just add, move to initiate an addendum to consider implementing changes to the ARM framework as recommended by the ARM subcommittee and peer review panel.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so what we have is a clarification and a more perfected motion that was with a seconder by Mr. Luisi, and thanks again, Mike, for helping craft that. Thanks to Maya and Caitlin for getting that up there for us. So I guess once again, with all of this new crafting, is there a discussion on the motion?
I see no hands.
Okay, great. Let's call this for a vote then, and with no additional discussion, I'll just ask: is there any objection to the motion?
I see no hands and objection.
Okay, thank you, Tony. So, Caitlin, again, if you can help me on agenda, are we through down to other business, or is there anything else you need?
Before Caitlin says anything, can you just say
I know, right? Let's clear the decks.
Sorry.
So, no. That's a text you should keep on hand for me. Is clear the deck. Do you need me to read it as well, Tony? Or?
It would be great to read it, just since I think it might have changed, and then if you could just say that it carries.
That sounds good. Okay, so move to initiate an addendum to consider implementing changes to the ARM framework as recommended by subcommittee and peer review panel. The motion was made by Mr. Clark, seconded by Mr. Luisi, and the motion passed by consent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do believe we are to the end of our agenda items.
Okay, thank you. Any other business to come before the board? And if you don't see hands, Tony, I do have one last bit.
Just give me a second. I see no additional hands.
Okay, so my last bit to add to the agenda is just to say goodbye as board chair. I will be turning the board over to John Clark. So the board will be staying in the hands of Delaware Bay members. I can't thank staff enough. I can't thank the ARM subcommittee and all the technical committee, and for all the hard work that has gone into this. Thanks especially to Kristen and to Caitlin and to Mike Schmidtke if he happens to be listening down there. It was really great working with all of you. Good luck, John.